All right, and welcome back to my football podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about all things college football and NFL. And it was a huge week in the college football world. Conference championship games are going on, playoff implications all over the place. We're going to be talking about all that. And in the NFL, also a huge week. You had a big matchup between the 49ers and Eagles. But we're first going to talk about that college football conference championship games that happened this weekend. A lot of playoff implications, like I mentioned, a lot of games that really mattered, and some upsets that also happened, and some teams that didn't make the playoffs. The playoff rankings were just revealed, so we'll get into all that, who made it, who was out. We'll talk about it. So there were about 10 games going on this Saturday and Friday, and 5 of them included playoff implications, and 5 of them did not. They were just conference championship games like the MAC or the Conference USA. So we're going to start with the ones that didn't really matter that much, just for bragging rights and all that. So first of all, in the Conference USA, it happened on Friday night. You had Liberty versus New Mexico State in the Conference USA championship game. Liberty undefeated, 12-0 going into this game. New Mexico State 10-3. And on both sides, there were a lot of missed calls in this game, a lot of holding penalties that weren't called. Lots of offense in this one, though. Lots of great plays, and Liberty just felt one step ahead like the entire game. They were always moving quicker than this New Mexico State team. They had a 14-point lead, but New Mexico State was able to come back and tie this game going into the fourth, but Liberty just overpowered them and ended up taking the win 49-35. The freshman quarterback from New Mexico State, Blake Burzak, played great for this team. I thought he played pretty well, especially for a true freshman coming into the game. But congrats on to Liberty for this great season that they played. Ranked number 24th in the country at 13-0. A great season for this Liberty team. They ended up winning 49-35 in this one. Next, you had the MAC Conference Championship game that happened early on Saturday. It was between a really good Toledo team and a pretty good Miami, Ohio team, but this one was a little bit of an upset. Toledo, the best offense in the MAC, I think. DeQuan Finn, the best player in the MAC, I think. And this Toledo team just looked dead against this Miami, Ohio team, especially the offense. DeQuan Finn for Toledo didn't play bad, I thought. Threw 18 completions and completed 1 touchdown, so not a bad game. But Miami, Ohio's defense played fantastic in this one, and that's what put them over the edge. Miami, Ohio ended up winning this game 23-14, so a great win for this Miami, Ohio team. They win the MAC. They had a great season and played fantastic in the MAC. Their only MAC loss was against Toledo, where they lost by 4 points, and they redeemed themselves when they beat Toledo in the MAC Conference Championship game. So congrats to this Miami, Ohio team. They played fantastic in this one. They ended up winning 23-14 against Toledo. Next, you have the Mountain West Conference Championship game. This one was between Boise State and UNLV. Boise State coming off 4 straight wins, so they've been looking pretty good. And UNLV just coming off a loss against San Jose State, so both these teams are trending 2 different directions. Boise State started out early with a couple touchdowns and just never looked back. They had a big lead at the half, and they ended up winning 44-20 against UNLV. Boise State stumbled at the start of the season, but were able to pick it up at the end, and were able to win this Mountain West Conference Championship, so a great win for this Boise team. They played fantastic in this game. Taylon Green threw 2 touchdowns in this one and had a good offensive performance for this Boise team. They put up a lot of points in this one and were able to play some good defense to limit UNLV's scoring. So great win for this Boise team, and congrats for them to winning the Mountain West. Next, you have the Sun Belt Conference Championship game between an 11-2 Troy team and an 8-5 Appalachian State team. This game was a pretty close game going into the fourth quarter. Appalachian State was only down 4 points, but Troy had a big fourth quarter, scoring 28 points to take them over the edge and actually blow out this Appalachian State team 49-23. A great win for Troy. They win the Sun Belt, and congrats to them. They were favored in this game, and they proved that. They ended up winning big against Appalachian State. Next is the American Athletic Conference Championship game between number 22 ranked Tulane and SMU. Both teams at 11-2. Actually, Tulane only had 1 loss going into this game, but they did pick up their second loss against SMU. This was a bit of a surprise because all Tulane needed to do was win this game, and they would move into a New Year's Six Bowl, which is one of the best bowls to play. But they ended up losing to this SMU team. This game was pretty close throughout, but SMU was able to pick up the win here, 26-14. Great win for this SMU team. They played fantastic in this one and was able to limit Tulane scoring, only having Tulane scoring 14 points in this one. So great win for SMU. they picked up the nice win against a really good Tulane team. So they win the American Athletic, and congrats to them. All right, those were the ones that that didn't have any playoff implications, weren't that important. Now we get to the ones that are important. These ones really mattered for playoff implications. I watched a lot more of these games, to be honest with you, so I'm going to go a lot more in depth into these games. On Friday night, you had the Pac-12 championship between Oregon 11-1 and Washington 12-0. A fantastic game. Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix both played like Heisman contenders in this one. Washington took an early lead in the first quarter and second quarter. They were up 20-3 late in the second quarter, but Oregon was able to come back in the third and fourth quarter. Wasn't enough though, as Washington was able to run out the clock in this one and were able to get the win 34-31. This clinches Washington's playoff spot essentially and eliminates Oregon from playoff contention. And this was heartbreaking for Oregon. Their only loss was against Washington in the regular season, and then again they lose to Washington in the Pac-12 championship. The last Pac-12 championship to happen with these major teams with USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington. So it was great to see that Washington was able to get it done, especially with such a good team they've had this season as they roll undefeated and they essentially clinched their playoff spot. This offensive line was enormous for this Washington team, especially down the stretch. They were able to get so many rushes. Dylan Johnson had a great game for this Washington team. Michael Penix Jr. was able to stay in the pocket, and because of this offensive line, was able to get out and throw some good passes. So, congrats to this Washington team. They win 34-31. Wasn't really that, it was a close game, but Washington was able just to run out the clock, so there wasn't anything too exciting at the end. But congrats to Washington. They clinched a playoff spot. Next, we move on to the Big 12 championship game between Texas and Oklahoma State. A great game. Texas was on fire, especially on this first half. They ended up scoring 35 points in the first half. Quinn Ewers threw for 452 yards, Texas' quarterback, and 4 touchdowns. The defense was good as well, only limiting Oklahoma State to 21 points total, and Texas ended up getting the win here, 49-21. They did their part and got a win, and now they need some help to get into the playoffs, but still a great win for this Texas team. They take the Big 12, and they didn't have to worry about it at all. They absolutely dominated from start to finish against Oklahoma State. So congrats to this Longhorns team. Next, we move on to probably the biggest game of the day. It was the SEC championship game between Georgia and Alabama. This one had huge playoff implications. Alabama had to win to get in, and also Georgia. They also had to win to get in, and Alabama played great in this game. They were able to keep up with this Georgia offense. And actually, Alabama's defense impressed me a bunch. Georgia being one of the best passing teams in the nation. This passing defense was all over. They were able to limit Brock Bowers, Georgia's star tight end, and this defense was on fire for this Alabama team. Carson Beck only threw for 243 yards and 0 touchdowns, while Jalen Milroe threw for 192 yards and 2 touchdowns for this Alabama team. Georgia had some offensive miscues. They had a fumble late in the third quarter that led to an Alabama field goal. Alabama was up double digits in the fourth quarter. Georgia was able to come back and score a touchdown to make it a 3-point game. They sent the ball back to Alabama, punted it back, and were never able to get the ball back. Georgia ended up losing this game 27-24. Great win for the Crimson Tide. And this mixed up the playoff implications all over because now do you put Georgia in? If you put Georgia in, you have to put Alabama in. We'll see. I'll tell you who got in and who's out at the end of the podcast, like I said. But a great win for this Alabama team. They played phenomenal in this game, able to limit this Georgia offense. And this Alabama offense really impressed me. I thought the one thing I didn't like about Jalen Milroe was he doesn't really throw the ball away. He runs around a lot, which is good, but still he gets sacked a lot. But still, the running game was good for this Alabama team. The passing game was good. They were all over this Georgia defense, passing and running. Played a phenomenal game, and congrats to Alabama for winning the SEC. Next, you get the Big Ten championship between Michigan and Iowa. And to be honest, this is probably one of the worst Big Ten championships we've had. Now, I heard about this golf course in Iowa that was offering free beer until Iowa scores, and they're probably still offering free beer because Iowa never scored in this game. Michigan dominated the offensive and defensive end, and were able to win this game 26-0 against Iowa. Iowa offense played horrible in this one, to be honest with you. didn't score any points, weren't able to get anything going, and Michigan's offense just kept rolling, and Michigan stays undefeated, improves to 13-0, and this Michigan team essentially clinched a playoff spot after this win against Iowa. So a great win for this Michigan team. They win the Big Ten. Next, in the final conference championship game to happen was this ACC conference championship game between Louisville and Florida State. Florida State coming into this game undefeated. Louisville 14th ranked in the country at 10-3. If you like defense, this is the game for you because Florida State's defense was phenomenal in this one. Their offense was pretty bad in this one just because Jordan Travis, their starting quarterback, was out for the season, like I mentioned in my last podcast. Their backup, Tate Rodemaker, actually had an injury against Florida last week and is out for this game as well. So they had to put in a freshman quarterback in. Brock Glenn, Florida State's freshman quarterback, a true freshman quarterback actually, played the entirety of this game and he only threw for 55 yards. Well, pretty bad performance from this Florida State offense, but it's what you expected. I mean, it's starting a freshman quarterback playing his first ever game in college. He played pretty decent, I guess. He did have some good passes, but of course, only throwing for 55 yards. The running game was pretty good for the Florida State team. They rushed for over 100 yards. The offense was pretty bad on both sides of the ball. Jake Plummer, Louisville's quarterback, was not able to get much either. He threw for one interception and had 0 passing touchdowns. Actually, Louisville, as a team, didn't have 1 touchdown in this game. So Louisville actually had a blocked punt, and I think at the end of the third or the start of the fourth quarter that got them in the red zone, but Louisville ended up throwing a pick and sending it back to Florida State. So a missed opportunity there for Louisville, and Florida State was able to get the win here, 16-6. They're undefeated, but there were still some questions about this Florida State team, especially how they played. But still, congrats to this Florida State team. They take home the ACC championship. So those are all the conference championship games to happen on Saturday. Now you move on to Sunday morning, and the committee can only pick 4 teams to send to the college football playoff, and there were about 6 that all had a reason to be there. Washington and Michigan both clinched their spots, and then you had 4 teams left, and the committee could only send 2. Texas, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida State. Only 2 could go. Michigan took the first spot. Washington took the second spot as expected. And in the third spot, Texas ended up taking it. So it'll be Texas versus Washington in one of the semifinal games. And Michigan was going to play the 4th spot, which was either Alabama or Florida State. Florida State undefeated. Definitely should have been there, but they picked Alabama instead. And this is what the committee talks about the entire time. Pick the 4 best teams, and I actually think they did a great job picking Alabama. Florida State did not play great yesterday night against Louisville. Had a bad offensive showing last night, and Alabama proved themselves against Georgia. That means that Florida State is the 5th spot and Georgia is the 6th spot. And I mean, Florida State did all they could. I feel so bad for them. They won all their games. They did everything they could to be there. Lost their starting quarterback, had to play with their backup, and then they lost their backup in the ACC championship game, and then to bring the 3rd string in, and still they won, and they went 13-0 the entire season. They did everything they could, but still they were out of the playoffs. So it's Michigan versus Alabama and Washington versus Texas in the playoffs. Georgia is actually out now because of their loss to Alabama. This is the first time ever that a 1 seed going into conference championship week has been out after. And this is the first time ever that a Power 5 school has not made the college football playoff being undefeated in this Florida State team. But it was either Alabama versus Florida State, and all the committee talks about is pick the best 4 teams, and that's exactly what they did. I give a round of applause to the committee because this was not an easy decision, and they did pick the best team. I thought Alabama was better, and if Jordan Travis was playing for this Florida State team, this would have been a completely different conversation. But Alabama played fantastic against Georgia, against a team that's won 29 straight games in this Georgia Bulldogs team, and that deserves something. And they took the 4th spot. Georgia is now 6th, and they had a bad loss against Alabama, and that's how quickly your season could change. I mean, 1 loss could change the season entirely for you. And if you were going to put Georgia in, you were going to have to put Alabama in. They just didn't have enough spots for that. And Texas's win early in the season at Alabama was a big reason I thought that they put Texas at 3 because of that head-to-head win. That was a big win for that Texas team early in the season at Alabama as well. So, I mean, that was one of the reasons that I thought Texas was above Alabama in the playoffs. Still, Michigan at 1, Washington at 2, Texas at 3, and Alabama at 4. That's all we have right now. Next week, I'll tell you all about the New Year's Six Bowls and all the other balls, and we'll give some predictions for those. And then I'll also be talking about the Army-Navy game next week. But a great week in college football this week. Let's move on to the NFL. So to start out with the NFL, we're going to start on Thursday. And on Thursday, we had Thursday Night Football like usual. And this week's game was the Seahawks versus Cowboys. Seahawks coming into this game 6-5, and the Cowboys coming into this one 8-3, and this was a high-scoring game. I mean, Geno Smith and the Seahawks offense, as well as the offensive line, played fantastic. Dak Prescott on fire again, and this Cowboys team looks impressive so far. Dak Prescott threw for almost 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, did get sacked 4 times, but those 3 touchdowns did make up for it. And Geno Smith, man, threw for 3 touchdowns and 334 yards, 334 yards, So a great day for both these quarterbacks. The Cowboys picked up a fourth quarter lead and never looked back. They ended up winning 41-35. A great win for this Cowboys team. They improved to 9-3. Next, we move on to the early Sunday games. The first one being a really good game between the Broncos and Texans. Tanks Bigsby, the Texans wide receiver, had to get carted off the field early in the first quarter, unfortunately, and he is out for the season. So it sucks for this Texans team that were looking to make the playoffs this season. Going to be out with one of their star wide receivers. The Texans then took a 13-0 lead in the first quarter. CJ Stroud had another really nice day passing and was able to get the ball out quick. The Broncos had a chance to win it with 20 seconds left. All they needed was a touchdown, down 5 points. But unfortunately, Russell Wilson got picked off in the end zone, and the Texans ended up winning 22-17. They improved to 7-6, while the Broncos fall to 6-6. Great win for this Texans team. CJ Stroud looks really, really impressive. I could see his Texans team definitely being in the playoffs. And this Broncos team, who are coming into this game with a, 5-game winning streak, they ended up losing that winning streak due to this really good Texans team. But both these teams were hot coming into this game, and the Texans just won this one. Next, we move on to the Commanders versus Dolphins. Commanders coming into this game 4-8, Dolphins 8-3, and the Dolphins dominated this game from the start. They were up 38-7 in the third quarter. The Commanders were able to manage to get 15 points in this Dolphins team, but what really impressed me was Tua and Tyreek. I mean, they started out the season hot. They kind of cooled off, but in this game, they had 2 touchdown bombs for the pair, some long passes for Tua to Tyreek, and just a great overall performance from this Dolphins offense and defense. Final score ended up being 45-15 with the Dolphins winning. A great win for this Dolphins team. Next, we look at the Jets versus Falcons game. Tim Boyle started this game for the Jets again. Lots of defense in this one for both teams. I was actually really impressed by this Jets defense. I mean, they held this Falcons offense to only 13 points total scored. The Jets offense was horrendous in this game, though, and that's what really kept them out of the game. They benched Tim Boyle in the fourth quarter for Trevor Siemian, and the Jets did have a chance to win it with 2 minutes left, but unfortunately they couldn't get down the field. Trevor Siemian ended up fumbling, and Falcons win this game 13-8. A good performance from this Jets defense, but not a great one from the Jets offense. So the Falcons get this one. They win by 5 points, final score being 13-8. Next, we look at another pretty interesting game between the Saints versus Lions. The Lions took a 21-0 lead early in the first quarter, so they were having a really good first quarter. The Saints came back to make a 6-point game going into the fourth with a score of 27-21. Derek Carr ended up fumbling at the start of the fourth quarter, and that resulted in a Lions touchdown. Unfortunately, in the middle of the fourth quarter, though, Derek Carr took a huge hit that kept him out for the rest of the game and should keep him out maybe for 1 or 2 more games. It's not a serious injury, but he was out for the rest of the game. After that, the Lions were able to run out the clock and win this game 33-28. Lions improved to 9-3 for the first time since 1962. So a great win for this Lions team. They look impressive so far. Next, we look at this game between the Cardinals and Steelers. The Cardinals coming into this game at 2-10, so haven't played very well. Due to Kyler Murray, not being there the first, I think, 7 or 8 weeks. So he's finally coming back from the injury, and this Cardinals team looks pretty decent. They ended up winning this game 24-10 against the Steelers team. Now, two big things to note in this game: Kenny Pickett left the game in the second quarter. Mitch Trubisky replaced him after that, but Kenny Pickett seems to have some type of shoulder injury or something, and he will be out for a couple more weeks. I don't think he'll be out later than Christmas time around then. I think he should get back in action soon. So it wasn't a huge serious injury, but still definitely something to keep note. Kenny Pickett's going to be out for a couple games. How does this affect the Steelers team? We'll have to see. And a bunch of weather delays in this game. I mean, there was one at halftime, one early in the third quarter that was around an hour or two long. So this game was going on for 5 or 6 hours straight. But still, the Cardinals got the win 24-10. Next, we look at this Titans versus Colts game. This is a pretty interesting one. This one actually went to overtime. An interesting moment that I saw from this game was rookie quarterback Will Levis yelling at DeAndre Hopkins, just something I saw on the field. But there were 2 block punts in this game, both for the Colts, that resulted in a touchdown for the Colts and a field goal. So this Colts team was blocking a lot of punts out there. Titans scored a touchdown with 5 minutes left to tie it at 25. They needed an extra point to take the lead, but unfortunately their holder was out. So backup quarterback now, Ryan Tannehill, had to hold the extra point, and it was missed, which kept this game at a 25-25 tie. Derrick Henry was injured in the fourth quarter. Same with Kenny Pickett. A little injury. Shouldn't keep him out too long, but might keep him out a game or two. This game ended up going to overtime, and Colts ended up getting a touchdown in overtime to win the game 31-28. A great win by this Colts team. They've been looking impressive recently. Even with Anthony Richardson out, Gardner Minshew has been leading this team, and I think it's kind of going under the radar. This Colts team is in 7-5 and is in a playoff spot right now. We'll see what they do come the end of the season, but they look good so far. Next, we have one of the worst games I have ever watched, to be honest with you. The Chargers vs. Patriots. This was, an atrocious game from both standpoints, especially on the Patriots side of the ball. This Patriots offense was horrible. The defense for the Patriots actually played pretty well, only holding the Chargers to 6 total points. But when you can't score any points, your defense doesn't really matter at that point unless you hold them out to 0 points as well. But the Patriots did have one last chance, down 6-0 in the fourth quarter, but as they have not been able to get any points on the board the entire game, they didn't get any points there either. And this game ended up with a Chargers win 6-0. One of the worst offensive performances I've ever seen. I don't really want to talk about this game anymore, but the Chargers didn't play good either, to be honest with you. Both these teams played horrendous, but the Patriots just played way worse than this Chargers team. I mean, this Patriots offense was horrible. I can't say it enough, but hopefully they get the number 1 pick in the draft and draft a quarterback. That's all I can hope for at this point. So that was the end of all the 12 o'clock games. Now I move on to the 3 o'clock games, where I think there were 3 or 4 of them here. The first one being this Panthers versus Buccaneers game. Both these teams having not the season they wanted, as I sure, but it's a pretty interesting game, a pretty close one. Buccaneers had a lead of, I think, 11 points going into the fourth quarter. Bryce Young had a receiver open on 4th and 6 with about 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter for the 30-yard touchdown, and that cut the game to 3 points, but they were never able to get the ball back, really, and this Buccaneers team ended up winning this game 21-18. Panthers having a really disappointing season. Buccaneers not as much, but still, this Buccaneers team looked pretty decent in this one. Next, you have this Rams versus Browns team. I know, this Browns team doesn't have Deshaun Watson anymore, but this Rams team really looked impressive. I mean, on the offensive side of the ball, they looked impressive. Puka Nacua, their rookie wide receiver, was playing really well. And this Rams team ended up winning 36-19. Browns had actually Joe Flacco in this one, not Dorian Thompson-Robinson, as he's out for an injury. But still, actually, Joe Flacco didn't play very bad, to be honest with you. He had 254 yards passing, 2 touchdowns. So a pretty good day. They just weren't able to keep up with this Rams offense, and the Rams got the win. And the game of the day, probably of the week actually, was this 49ers versus Eagles game, an NFC Championship rematch game. And this was a really interesting one for sure. I mean, this 49ers team has looked impressive, and this Eagles team has looked maybe even more impressive, but this 49ers team looked impressive on Sunday. They ended up winning this game 42-19. Jalen Hurts did go out in the third quarter with a little bit of a minor injury. He came back in the game, so nothing serious. But this 49ers team, they had all threats rolling. They had Deebo Samuel playing good, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Brock Purdy. All their stars were out. This Eagles team just couldn't keep up with this 49ers offense, and the 49ers got the win 42-19 in this one. Next, we move on to Sunday Night Football, and this was a really interesting game between the Chiefs and Packers. I think the Packers are finally hitting their stride now. I mean, they've won, I think, 3 straight games in a row, and they look impressive versus a really good Chiefs team. They scored touchdowns on their first 2 possessions to take a lead, and they never looked back. I think they had the lead the entire game, and they ended up winning 27-19. This Packers team, they look really impressive. Jordan Love fired the ball. He was good. Christian Watson played well with 2 touchdowns in this one, and Christian Watson also did go out with an injury, but I think he'll be back next game or even the game after. So nothing major for Christian Watson, but like I said, this young Packers team looks like they're developing right in front of our eyes. They look really good. They won by 8 points, 27-19 in this one. And finally, we move on to the last game of Week 13. It was Monday Night Football between the Bengals and Jaguars. This was a game that I was anticipating the Jaguars to blow out the Bengals, but that was not the case. This Bengals team came to play, and Jake Browning especially came to play. He had a great day throwing for 300-plus yards and a touchdown. As a backup quarterback, that's impressive. Unfortunately, around in the fourth quarter, Trevor Lawrence got rolled up on his ankle and ended up having to leave the game and was kept out for the rest of the game. There are reports that it was only a minor injury and he should be back in a couple weeks. So for people that were fearing the worst, that is not the case. Trevor Lawrence should be back definitely this season, if not, in the next couple weeks. But CJ Beathard had to fill in for him for the last 5 minutes and actually did pretty good leading this Jaguars team to kick a game-time field goal at 31 apiece. Unfortunately, this game went into overtime and the Bengals were able to capture this win by 3 points, the final score being 34-31. Great win for this Bengals team. I think they can maybe make the playoffs. I mean, they look really good on Monday and they looked impressive. Jake Browning looked impressive. For this Jaguars team, hopefully Trevor Lawrence can come back, but CJ Beathard didn't play bad, and I think that if CJ Beathard does play for 2 or 3 weeks, this team should be fine. Alright, so that's all the games that happened this week on Week 13. The big thing being all the quarterback injuries. I mean, so many quarterbacks have gone down this season, even with minor injuries, keeping them out a couple weeks. But even big ones like Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, keeping them out the rest of the year. Hopefully, they can come back next year and be better, but still, a big issue in the league is these quarterback injuries, and especially these ACL tears that are happening. That's it for me. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I'll be back next week. I know this was a bit of a long one, so I try to keep it shorter throughout the end, but thanks for listening, and goodbye.